Yuli Edelstein is Speaker of the Knesset, a Likud member who's second only to the Prime Minister himself on the party list. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Let's talk about the campaign. Election is, of course, Tuesday next week. How's the campaign going? And with 5 days to go, do you believe at this point that you are likely to win?
Well, it's an uphill battle. We are optimistic. We are working very hard, but the competition is very tough. I think that all the polls show that it could be a question of just 1 or 2 seats in the Knesset to define this or that side's victory. So we are working in order to continue with the policy that Likud and Netanyahu have been leading for the last 10 years.
Let's talk about some of the issues that have been roiling, not least this very controversial announcement by the Prime Minister on annexation of the West Bank. Speaker Edelstein, I know that you support Mr. Netanyahu's campaign pledge to annex parts of the West Bank if he is re-elected. As you know, there has been massive international blowback from the UN to the European Union, to the Arab League and beyond. Yesterday, I spoke with the Foreign Minister of Jordan, one of only 2 Arab countries to have peace treaties with Israel, about what could happen if annexation goes through. Have a listen.
Despair will prevail, and violence is definitely going to erupt, an expression of this frustration and loss of hope. And that is a kind of violence that we fear will have repercussions way beyond the borders of the Palestinian occupied territories in Israel and the region into the whole international community.
Annexation, sir, of the Jordan Valley would be a wanton transgression of international law that brings with it the prospect of serious unrest. How would you justify that?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't call it a campaign pledge. I think that we are talking about a plan of applying Israel's sovereignty to the area of the Jordan Valley, an area, with those who are familiar with it, not densely populated by the Palestinians. And the Prime Minister, by the way, was very clear that the sovereignty wouldn't apply to the town of Jericho, where the Palestinians live, according to the Oslo agreements and all the other international agreements. And it saddens me to hear these threats about the unrest and possible violence. But I would just like to remind you, Becky, that not so long ago, when we were discussing the move of the American embassy to Jerusalem, we heard the same statements coming from all over, how the whole Middle East will be on fire and how the peace and prosperity will never come back to Jerusalem. Thank God the American embassy has been in Jerusalem for the last year and a half, and everything is quiet. I'm talking to you right now from Jerusalem, and the streets are full of happy people. There is no unrest whatsoever.
Let me put this to you then.
Hope.
Sorry, you sincerely hope. I want to let you finish.
No, I sincerely hope that we won't hear these threats. And by the way, as far as the reaction of the international community is concerned, well, we heard some statements coming from certain foreign offices, but I wouldn't call it a general uproar. And not everyone agrees with our policy, but on the other hand, what do they suggest? We already had that experiment according to the... Yes, please, go on.
Okay, let me put this to you. How would you justify unilateral annexation outside of a negotiated settlement with the Palestinians? And I just, with respect, sir, want to suggest that I can't remember the last time that Israel or a statement made by the Prime Minister was met with such almost united outright condemnation.
Well, as I've said, I remember different times when everything we would say about Judea and Samaria in general would be met with a much harsher response. But on this particular issue of the Jordan Valley, I would say I would justify it with two paragraphs. One, our historic rights there in the area, and the other one, every military expert I know and you know would agree that it's impossible to defend the state of Israel without the military control in this area. So with these two issues combined, I think that it's quite obvious that under no negotiations we will be able to give up the Jordan Valley. So this is a very simple justification.
So I'm going to put this to you again. You justify unilateral annexation outside of a negotiated settlement with the Palestinians, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Well, unfortunately, I haven't seen any negotiations for the last several years. I regret that. That's definitely not Israel's fault or Netanyahu's fault. But I would dare say, I noticed the stress of the word unilateral when we were protesting, some of us, including myself, the unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. I don't remember that anyone was talking so negatively about unilateral steps. The results are very well known. The moment we uprooted all the Jewish communities there and withdrew all the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, from the Gaza Strip, we've been in an ongoing war on our southern border for the last 14 years. So I think that as far as the Jordan Valley plan is concerned, it could bring us even closer to peace because things will become more clear. Right now, with this probably illusion of some people about the future of this area, it makes it harder to negotiate.
Let me ask you this last question, sir. Does Israel's international standing matter to you?
Absolutely.
And the damage that election promises, look, there was a lot more detail from the Prime Minister this week, but ultimately we've pretty much heard that election promise before. You have no issue then, if you say that Israel's international standing matters, you have no issue with the sort of condemnation that you have witnessed or we have witnessed this week. I guess one of my questions should have been as a follow. Is this just an election promise for the base at this point?
I'm absolutely positive it's not just an election promise. It's a plan. The Prime Minister was very clear. He asked from the Israeli voters to support or not support, God forbid, this kind of plan, to get a mandate, as they say, from the Israeli voters. And I do have to say that even the things that I mentioned earlier, the move of the American embassy to Jerusalem, the recognition by the American administration of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, also were met with some condemnations. Right now, we see additional countries, some of them moving their embassies, some of them opening all kinds of cultural centers or trade centers in Jerusalem. So I sincerely hope that if we talk, and I hope we talk, in 2 or 3 years from now, it will be quite natural for a country to have an embassy in Jerusalem. By the same token, I would say that probably in a number of years, it will be quite natural that Israel has sovereignty over the Jordan Valley.
And that the view of Yuli Edelstein, who is the Speaker of the Knesset, a Likud member, who, as I suggested at the beginning of this, is second only to the Prime Minister himself on the party list. We will be in Israel covering those elections next week, sir. We look forward to the results.